If you've ever entered a boutique wine shop, you've probably at least heard someone talking about natural wine, especially if the shop owner has a beard, Buddy Holly glasses, and has strong opinions about why your favorite band sucks. Or maybe you've heard someone asking after wines with sexy descriptions like raw, naked, or minimal intervention. Well, welcome to the world of natural wines, a world which is at times hopeful, pioneering, confusing, and irritating, often all at once. In the past 8 years or so, internet search volume for natural wines has more than quintupled and is showing no signs of stopping. In larger cities, wine shops have emerged that are entirely devoted to natural wines, sometimes, but not always, at prices that can take your breath away. And if your immediate knee-jerk response is to say, "What the hell is natural wine?" well, it's a fair question. The answer should and could be easy, but it's just not. In general, natural wines refer to wines that are made according to the principles of minimal intervention. This means that the grape grower and the winemaker try to get out of the way of the wine's natural ability to make itself, at least as much as possible. If that sounds good to you, especially faced with supermarket shelves filled with wines that are more chemically manipulated than insert aging movie star here, no one would blame you. The problem is, getting out of the way and letting the wine make itself are both irritatingly vague propositions, and they mean very different things to different people, especially natural winemakers themselves, who fight like the Real Housewives of Rioja. If you've ever heard two punk bands fight over who is the more authentic and it made you want to throw up on your Doc Martens, you should probably stay off of wine Twitter. The infighting there is ruthless. So to get a sense of where this movement comes from, let's talk about World War II. One of the many wonderful instruments of warfare developed during this conflict was DDT, a powerful pesticide that was so effective, farmers immediately began to use it everywhere, even on kids who would line up just to be sprayed down by a wandering DDT truck. But not all farmers were thrilled about this new innovation, and some of them were quite good at thinking and writing about it. In particular, there was Jules CHAUVET, a winemaking merchant in France's Beaujolais region. This is the land of terroir, and Chauvet didn't want anybody turning these rustic vineyards into a middle school gym locker hosed down in Axe body spray. He wrote extensively about it and campaigned against the use of pesticides everywhere in the area. Chauvet took a fair amount of his influence from the German Lebensreform movement, which emphasized a back-to-nature philosophy back in the late 19th and early 20th century. Chauvet argued for a pure farming method, and as the ecology movement of the 1960s grew in power, he was heard by an increasing number of influential winemakers who were concerned not just with the effect of pesticides and other chemical interventions on the land, but on the quality of their wines, especially a small group of winemakers in Beaujolais' Morgon and Renier regions. This was the famous Gang of Four, comprising Marcel Lapierre, Jean Froilard, Guy Breton, and Jean-Paul Thévenet. From the 1970s on, these four winemakers devoted their efforts to carrying on Jules Chauvet's philosophy of very careful, gentle, ecologically responsible grape growing and winemaking. Eventually, the movement spread outside of Beaujolais, partially due to the influence of the U.S. importer Kermit Lynch, who made the premium wines of the Gang of Four a part of his portfolio. Slowly, these natural Beaujolais wines gained traction and prestige until the great financial meltdown of 2008. If you thought losing your home and or your job was bad, just think. Some people were too broke to afford high-quality Burgundy wines and needed to find a more affordable alternative. Enter the excellent wines of the Beaujolais crew, and in particular, the natural wines of the Gang of Four. Not only were the wines delicious, but the anarchically crunchy back-to-nature philosophy jived well with a society that basically turned Whole Foods into Walmart. Now, if you're thinking, what on earth could be wrong with such a wholesome, earth-friendly philosophy, especially given that the world is on fire and we'd like to drown our sorrows in something other than gasoline? I agree with you. Most reasonable people agree with you, except maybe those few people who can't stand to drink anything that doesn't contain mega purple dehydrated oak powder and yellow number 5. The problem, like with so many things, isn't with the philosophy. It's not with the purists who simply want to make an ecologically responsible wine. And it's not with consumers who want to invest in a style of agriculture and winemaking that truly speaks to them. The problem is with the ambiguity of the whole movement, mainly in how vulnerable it leaves itself to being taken over by a bunch of cynical, opportunistic assholes who want to prey on well-meaning consumers who are enamored of the word natural and all its positive connotations. Because there is no regulatory committee on natural wine. There is no strict set of rules and guidelines that must be followed for a wine to be labeled natural. Think of the terms organic and biodynamic. For these words to appear on a wine label, the winemakers must jump through a number of hoops to qualify. The wines, vineyards, and sites must be tested and retested by a regulatory organization in order to earn that stamp of approval. If that sounds like a pain in the ass, that's the whole point. We assign a lot of meaning to the words organic and biodynamic. By defining them strictly, we create clear expectations for how a wine is to be made, from fruit set to bottling. This is not remotely the case with natural wine. The core tenets of natural winemaking can be defined as follows: organic and/or biodynamically farmed grapes, whether certified or not; dry farming, meaning no artificial irrigation; low yields, no added sugars or acids; no cultured or commercial yeasts, only native yeasts; no flavor additives, including those imparted by new oak; minimal fining or filtration, if at all; and finally, minimal to no added sulfur. Now, if you're an aspiring natural winemaker and this sounds like a lot to follow, then you're in luck, my friend. The number of these principles that you need to follow in order to sell your wine as a natural wine, emblazoned right there on the label, is 0. You don't have to follow a single one of these. You could take a bottle of Apothic Red Blend, put in a couple packets of Splenda, stir in a couple scoops of Country Time lemonade, and voila! You've just made 750 milliliters of Jimmy's Porch Settin' natural wine. Think of it this way. If you went $120,000 to $200,000 into debt to call yourself doctor, and your next door neighbor drops out of 9th grade and then makes a business card that says, "Call me Dr. Ronnie," you'd be pretty pissed off if he was suddenly allowed to work in the same hospital as you, making the same money as you, and getting all the same prestige and respect you did, even though he thinks the hippocampus is a college for trunkless elephants. And you'd be even more pissed if you were one of Dr. Ronnie's patients and instead of years of hard study and clinical expertise, you were treated to an old-fashioned bloodletting and a chest covered with Bugs Bunny Band-Aids. Yes, this is an exaggeration, but the principle is still at play here. If we want the term natural wine to be meaningful, it has to mean something, and that requires a certain amount of specificity. As it stands right now, the word natural, when it applies to food and drink, is about as close to meaningless as it gets. It conjures images of health, environmentalism, and a lack of chemicals, whatever that means. And those are very attractive images. But if that health-conscious customer gets home to find that their natural Cabernet Sauvignon has a strange, funky barnyard smell and a bunch of particles floating all through it, they're going to be very confused, even though that may be a perfect representation of the winemaker's intention. And even worse, if they bought someone else's nice fruity Cabernet Sauvignon that said natural on it, even though it was no more natural than insert aging movie star here's face, they're going to be pissed. And for all the wrong reasons. The natural wine movement is admirable, and the resistance to government intervention is certainly understandable, given that it was the government spraying all that DDT in the first place that led to it. The best practitioners of the natural wine movement simply want to make wine in the best way they know how, honoring the land and the grapes with a level of integrity most of us don't have. Additional regulatory hoops might seem like anathema to the cause. So what do? A good step for winemakers, or more specifically wine label designers, would be to show your work. Instead of using the same nebulous, pseudo-poetic language about being in touch with the earth or time-honored traditions, simply be clear about what you did and didn't do. Dry farming? Check. No added sugar or acid? Check. No filtration or fining? Check. Minimal sulfur? Check. Because it's not the word natural that's important. It's the practices. Talk about the practices. And the best step for consumers is simply to be educated about what the effects of these practices are on the wines. Fining and filtration, arguably, may strip a wine of its flavors, but they also help stabilize and clarify the wine. Commercial yeast may contribute to sameness in flavors, but it also makes a successful fermentation more likely. In other words, there's a give and take. If we want to acknowledge the importance of the natural winemaking movement, we have to allow the word itself to be meaningful. So define it, own it. Because if you don't, some corporate jackass is going to make it mean whatever they want it to mean.